Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 93 of IGEL Weekly. I'm your host, Andy Whiteside. I've got Chris Feeney with me. Chris, I know it's been, 3-4 weeks since IGEL Disrupt. I assume you're all recovered, back to normal, and, dealing with hopefully good fallout from the event.
Definitely, there was a heavy dose of travel. I was thinking about this for the last, for the first few months of the year. Lots of events. It's always trade show season, kind of get through in May, and so it's been a few weeks. Been off the road, thankfully recuperating. Um, Doing some family things with my daughter graduating college and kind of getting through that, which was amazing. But yeah, kind of summer is here. Just had Memorial Day, so I'm excited about a little bit of R&R mixed with work and play, perhaps over the next
Yeah,
couple of months here.
it's that time of year where you still got to get work done, but you start thinking about how you're going to enjoy the summer, get through that. And I've got a beach trip coming up this week, but I'm going to be working and taking my kids to the beach. Should be interesting.
I've adopted my wife's a teacher,
You,
so when she's off, she gets 2 months. So I'm adopting the hey, our kids are gone for the summer, so I can work from anywhere. So let's pick a spot and go. So,
yeah, yeah. That's a good idea, and it does work to a large degree these days, as you know. It still creates some challenge, especially when you have a wife that's a teacher, or in my case, a retired school teacher. When the summers come, the teachers pretty much are off, and to some degree, kind of expect those around them to kind of be off too, which is one of the benefits of that career, no doubt. At least that's how I see it. So, Chris, the blog that we're reviewing today is something that happened at Disrupt, and I was very curious about it, and I'm glad you were talking about it. I'll share my screen in a minute, but the title of it is IGEL Announces New App Software Development Program and Toolkit. I'll read the first section here. It says, accelerating the development of apps for IGEL App Portal, aka IGEL Linux. Now at 50 apps strong, IGEL releases a new IGEL Ready developer program and SDK to optimize delivery of apps for the IGEL Ready ecosystem, and I'm going to add the word operating system. Chris, we'll have a bunch of questions, but why did you bring this blog forward today?
So, I thought it was very interesting because it's sort of we broke up Disrupt into essentially two focus days, right? The first was the now, and the second day was the next. And so this was announced on the second day, the next. Because it is something that is not yet out, but will be released very soon. And so, in about a year or so after we officially launched OS 12, and of course the app portal itself, and so it reminds me of sort of I've talked about this before. When the iPhone was first announced, right, it looked like more of an advanced iTouch thing or whatever it was, iPod or whatever. And then the apps began to show up and the usefulness and things like that. And so here we are a year later, and we've definitely seen more and more applications begin to show up. And so what became a reality was, how do we make this much more scalable? And so what began, we kind of had a program before with what we called our custom partitions. And so this is sort of, I'll call it custom partitions version 2 or something. And I know that's probably not the right way to say it, but it's really taking that idea that these third-party apps or stuff that wasn't already included, now there's a toolkit to put it all together and then do it in a secure manner, and each of the vendors can use this to begin building and deploying apps. And so and obviously kind of taking the operating system and then layering in the more functional applications, those native app experiences that people are beginning to look for.
Yeah. So, Chris, that's what I found curious about this. Let me see if there's a way to kind of walk through the article and get this out of it. But yes, not really segmented out, but that's okay. We'll just kind of talk through it a little bit. Does this mean that IGEL believes there's a spot in the end user compute world, or maybe bypassing end user compute world, where we don't have to rely on delivery apps like delivery protocols like Citrix and VMware, Omnissa, AVD, even browser-based applications where we can literally write native apps for IGEL Linux and have that be the solution stack for the customer?
Potentially, there's other types of things that I begin to see. So just functional things that, one that's about to come out, I believe, here soon is just an auto discovery of like printers on the network, right? Something that sounds, you know, in today's world, you just you bring the laptop home or whatever you put on your home network and it figures out things. And so just making it simpler and easier, little utilities like that to certainly full on browsers or things where you don't necessarily need a delivery mechanism. And so about to be released in short order, we'll have the Island browser going out to the public portal as well as the Microsoft Edge browser. And then we've got the Microsoft Intune client. These are all things that were announced at Disrupt, and so these functional applications that can provide some value, but I think you're going to see still a mixed scenario where some applications they just don't run natively on Linux, or there's other third-party integrations and things that would be required in order to have a really good user experience. But it might start off with some simple use cases at first and then advance from there.
Yeah. Okay, so the way you answered that was interesting, right? So it didn't talk about like I kind of teed you up and you answered it probably really appropriate from an IGEL perspective. I teed you up for let's just bypass all the other stuff and take over the space, which obviously is not the case. You're not going to do that, but you are enabling if there was a specific application to be able to install it locally, and if that was the use case, but think from your perspective, my perspective, I assume IGEL's perspective, you can clarify that one. We know this end user compute thing is very broad, and it's going to take a entire ecosystem of applications, which is what you guys are doing to enable it, make it more easily obtainable. In order to address the overall needs of most clients. Maybe there's a one-off use case where a single application like AS400 client is all you need because it's 1992 again. But is that a fair way to say it? Like I just basically translated what you said. There's still this need for all these development around end user compute related apps. And oh, by the way, if you had just one application or a handful of applications you needed to make ready for Linux, which might already have a Linux client, and you wanted to make sure it was IGEL ready, you could do that too.
And I think it's a combination of that. I think there will be, like today, for example, we've got the Teams Progressive Web app, which you can install as a separate app. And then some other, we got the Zoom client, we're using Zoom to record this today. Like that's a natively running Linux thing. And sometimes it's, I don't necessarily need to access, and run a Zoom call from my virtual desktop. I can just run it locally with the browser, log in and just work out of the browser all day long and be completely functional,
Yeah.
And also, part of what you see here is what was also announced, I think, in conjunction with this is that I think as we begin to see some of these newer hardware devices begin to emerge, like last week, if you were paying attention, you heard nothing but AI PCs coming, right? And with our hardware partners, HP, Lenovo, and LG, I know Lenovo is on top of that, and so I'm very curious to see what sort of emerges from that, where you have maybe an AI capable app that can do some sort of functionality running locally on IGEL. It's going to be an interesting, I would say, next 4 years. Is been seeing some predictions about the types of devices that are going to come, and then obviously what capabilities, But all in all, I think I was thinking about this morning. Um, I have a variety of laptops. We talked about this, one of which has Windows on it, and it went through a firmware update or a BIOS update. And then when it came back up, I noticed some applications were in the startup that I just don't need, and there's other things. And so you have this scenario where we've been used to these apps that are bloated or these OSs that have things that we just don't need. I don't need the Xbox app, as far as I can tell, on my work PC. Why is it included? Sorry, Microsoft. I'm not an Xbox gamer guy. Some people are, but why would I be using that? It's not my job. I don't need to have that or some other things. And so with IGEL, you get what you need, and then you layer in the pieces that you only need. And
right.
And then of course, if
And
I don't need,
and in
yeah, I'm
some
sorry.
cases, get in some cases get what you need might be that one application that does have a Linux offering that you could take it, make it IGEL ready, or tweak it, make it IGEL ready, and next thing you know, you were able to accomplish the get Windows off the endpoint, even though it's still in the data center. It's still, very secure, very applicable for lots of use cases. But in some use cases, it just won't make sense to have it on the endpoint.
Sure. Well, what's really cool is just last week we did a webinar with the first vendor that actually created an app for the port of liquidware, and I know you guys have worked with them before on some integration. I believe it was with ServiceNow, if I'm not mistaken. And we actually brought that use case up where have some intelligence on the endpoint where it can integrate and automatically maybe open up a ticket proactively because it recognizes or at least puts some alert that to the user that, hey, your Wi-Fi is kind of spotty or whatever it might be. Um, so applications like that will overall help with both the administrative side and also the user experience side. And so it might be a specific thing, or it might be, something that can plug into the larger ecosystem. Um, what was also announced is some of these vendors that we've previously not really done a lot with, but you've got Zscaler working on an app right now. Um, and we hope, and if I said that accidentally, bags out, right? We've got vendors like this where they have some really amazing networking, SaaS, secure service edge type things. And so, and Intune, I would put in there, right? This conditional access, right? Where now we've got some intelligence on the endpoint saying that, hey, this device is IGEL and it's for my company, and therefore I'm going to allow it to be able to access these resources to do their job. Um, and so, even
Yeah.
Citrix, right? They announced their enterprise browser, capability, and we've got a sneak preview of that right now, where you can put a shortcut on the desktop to launch the enterprise browser and then access your applications from
Yeah.
there. So,
Yeah, Chris, these are all interesting things for me because these are all things that I've been talking about with these vendors for a while now. Asking them, what are you going to do to develop your platform on Linux? In this case, IGEL, and they're stepping up. And what really resonates with me in this conversation is these vendors that see a future where enterprise customers, or even mid-market and commercial, and maybe even SMB customers, they can get away from having Windows on the endpoint, which goes a massive way. I was having a conversation with my marketing team this morning around our security practice, and I realized I got to start calling it modern security practice because we look at it more of a holistic approach, not just building moats around our important assets. And this is part of that story.
well, certainly, like I said, I'm excited because the way it was demoed. Our CTO Matthias Haas talked about the idea that he likes to cook, and he's found that he might be able to go and there's websites that have everything you need to cook an amazing recipe, and here's the ingredients you need, and depending on how fancy or whatever, you can add as many of these ingredients, or you could simplify the recipe, whatever. And so what we've tried to do is simplify the recipe for creating these apps, and with a tool where you can just literally plug these pieces together and then run this tool, and it builds essentially the app. And why is that important? Because IGEL as an operating system being read-only, you cannot go and just download stuff from any kind of Linux app portal that might exist today from Ubuntu or whatever, and there's plenty of them out there. It just doesn't exist. We've completely removed that capability, and that's always been the case. And so from a security perspective, it's that, just like if I'm going to build an app for the Apple Store, I have to go through a vetting process, and then that app gets vetted before it gets, available. And so we've got a similar thing here where these independent software vendors, or even partners, for example, if they want to, or even customers can ultimately say, I've got a custom app that I want to use and create so it can run correctly on IGEL. And that's what this tool is going to be about.
So, Chris, this makes me reflect back on the day when I learned the difference between why Microsoft beat Novell. And I walked into a data center with a guy, and he said, well, you look in the aisles, okay, Microsoft on this side, Microsoft on that side. It used to be Novell on the right side, Microsoft on the left side. And he asked me, what happened? And I was like, well, I don't know. Microsoft is Microsoft. It's all I've known. I knew Novell for a couple of years of my career in the very beginning. But and he made a really, really logical point When you walked in with a CIO 20 plus, maybe 30 years ago now, he said, okay, I got Novell servers over here. I got Microsoft servers over there. Why do I have to have both? And said, well, the Microsoft servers, makes it very easy to develop and run applications on. He's like, well, don't they do the same thing? Well, no, the Novell ones we use for the infrastructure. Microsoft does infrastructure and applications. Okay, well, if this one does infrastructure and applications and they make it easy to develop applications on, why do we have both? Like, well, I guess we don't really need both, do we? And boom, next thing you know, here comes Microsoft and there goes Novell. That was like a landmark moment for me, because I realized at that point, Microsoft, if you go back and read, Bill Gates and some of the leadership there and where they come from, they're application developers at heart anyway. They understood applications, kind of rule the space.
Well, yeah, I mean, I remember when I came to Raleigh, moved down here and got into my first IT job, essentially. Even a little bit before that, I remember experiencing a lot of customers that were running Novell from their e-directory perspective, and then had GroupWise, and trying to migrate them over to Microsoft. That was a large project, and thankfully there were some tools that kind of helped with the automation of some of that. But um, there was some technical things that could be done. But I remember Microsoft just sort of integrating everything from the operating system to the back-end server and the networking tools, and obviously pulling in their Exchange and email system and just making it seamless. But we also saw the rise of um, some our first viruses that began to get rampant, taking advantage of some of those security holes. I'll never forget the day I love you virus kind of hit and took our email system down. And so things like that began to emerge, where you had the need for those antivirus and other things, those security tools, because it wasn't really, on the forefront. Whereas IGEL's kind of had that approach, right? Built from the ground up from our founding, to be run in an untrusted environment. So now layer in an application process where when you pull in the apps that you absolutely need, and then you keep the ones off that you don't. But I think what we're going to see is, as I've already seen, because I have access to see kind of what's waiting in the wings, and there's some pretty cool stuff out there that's going through different release candidates, and then eventually it'll make its way to the public portal. So I'm excited to see sort of the the newer vendors out there in the ecosystem, as well as some other stuff that may be little utilities or whatever that people can use, and begin solving problems for in a Linux world.
And it's needed. It's going to make a massive difference on the security. It already is, right? For customers who are adopting this, and we've got several that have had ransomware attacks on the Microsoft endpoint side, and the IGEL, literally IGEL, Linux, Citrix, VMware, you name it side, it's completely over there, just humming along, no problem. Even though the rest of the environment's just gotten devastated. It really is going to change the game for people that adopt it, and it goes back to that modern security conversation. You just can't keep looking at this through the same old way. It's clearly amazing and powerful and broken all at the same time.
I think the one thing that kind of, especially for partners like you, is having that app that gives you intelligence on the endpoint and what's going on there, as well as visibility into the everything in between, to help you understand, from an end user perspective, is there something going on? The user's experiencing something on the endpoint. Is it actually on the endpoint or something else? And so an app, obviously like Liquidware, there's others out there too, Control Up and EG Innovations and Lakeside, but that type of intelligence will just make, CIOs, partners, everybody a little bit smarter and hopefully more proactive as they see things emerging in the environment. They can anticipate that and respond. So,
yeah. Well, Chris, I appreciate you jumping on. That helped me a ton, to be honest with you, because I saw the announcement and I kind of let it be. I didn't really want to talk to people a whole lot about that. I was too busy with clients and having fun at the event. But I was curious what the direction is. It'll be interesting to watch this one unfold and see if like one app beyond the Citrixes and VMwares and AVDs of the world, and the Island browsers and the Microsoft browsers, if anybody outside of that world, and the monitoring solutions like we talked about here with Liquidware, if anybody steps up and takes that one to the next level. I mean, imagine if Epic Hyperspace, which is kind of browser based a little bit. You tell me. But imagine if that
Drive.
became native on Warp Drive. Sorry, Warp Drive. What if that became native on IGEL? The number of use cases that could possibly pop up in healthcare.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because there have been a lot of conversations. Since we're on this topic, Epic, obviously one of the largest healthcare companies in the world. I know I've got at least three Epic My Charts because I have gone to WakeMed, UNC, and Duke, but they're all seamless and I can integrate all the charts together. But they launched a new version of their product called Hyperdrive a couple years ago, and most customers should already be deployed. But it was a Chromium-based built app, uh, primarily from a Windows perspective, um, because a lot of the integrations with those third-party vendors, those devices, software integrations, unfortunately, it's that long tail of Windows we've talked about before. Just it's all Windows based, but I think we've been exploring maybe some scenarios. I mentioned it before. Um, Maybe it's starting with a small set of use cases where I can just use a browser to access some information, and then over time, um, seeing more functionality get developed. I mean, it would be kind of cool to see a that type of app running locally on iGel. I think we're a ways away from that, um, mainly because of all the third-party integrations in a healthcare setting. And I imagine it might exist if it's a financial setting with the main app and then these integrations from partners and stuff like that. So it just takes time, but I think hopefully this SDK toolkit will kind of accelerate the ability to make something like that happen. So we'll see. We're having those conversations. Customers are certainly driving a lot of that because they don't want to be vulnerable on the endpoint, but they also need to be able to be productive and taking care of patients and stuff. So.
Yeah, yeah, that's awesome. Well, Chris, I appreciate the time. Welcome to summer. I think it's officially here. I guess Memorial Day actually makes it official. And of course, we need to reflect on the reason for the holiday. I probably should have done that earlier. Really, a lot of value in us based on what's happened before others went before us. And I just want to say thank you to the folks who have served, and specifically those who lost their lives for our country. Chris, I appreciate the time today and look forward to talking to you again in 2 weeks.
Thanks, Andy. Always a pleasure.